On the day that was supposed to mark our engagement, an unsettling event occurred. A girl who had persistently pursued my boyfriend for the past 2 years made an attempt on her own life. Without hesitation, my boyfriend left my side and rushed to the hospital. The entire night passed without his return. It wasn't until my 20-second attempt to reach him that I finally heard his voice, tinged with impatience. "Irene," he said, "can't you be more understanding?" Larry and I shared a long history, stretching back to our childhood. Our families were close, we were neighbors, and our lives had been intertwined through the same schools, culminating in our acceptance into the same university. It was during our freshman year winter break, on New Year's Eve, that Larry confessed his feelings. He told me he had been waiting for that day and earnestly asked me to be his girlfriend, promising a lifetime of gentle care. Our friends celebrated with us, and I, overcome with emotion, admitted that I had been waiting for that moment too. I embraced him, and we shared a deep kiss. Our families were already supportive of our connection, and they rejoiced in our newfound relationship. However, things began to shift during our sophomore year. At the first-year orientation, Larry, as an accomplished sophomore, delivered a speech. He was undeniably popular, the heartthrob of the entire school. As he stood on the stage, a wave of excited whispers rippled through the crowd of girls. I watched from the sidelines, feeling a sense of helplessness, and decided to wait for him outside. While I was sitting there, two young men approached me and asked for my phone number. Coincidentally, just as Larry was the school's most admired male student, I was often referred to as the campus belle. I had a certain confidence in my appearance. "She has a boyfriend." Larry's voice cut through the air from behind me. The two young men flushed with embarrassment, apologizing profusely before quickly departing. Larry didn't appear pleased. I smiled and linked my arm through his. "Come on," I said. "What do you want for dinner? My treat." Larry playfully pinched my chin. "How about I lock you up at home so no one else can see you?" "Imprisonment? No way," I joked. "That's too kinky." Larry laughed, then kissed me firmly on the cheek, a possessive gesture. I playfully pushed him away just in time to see a girl standing behind him. She was staring at us, her expression shocked, holding a piece of paper as if she'd been caught off guard. Larry followed my gaze but didn't seem to pay her much attention. He took my hand, and we walked away. I encountered that girl again during the student council recruitment. I remembered her because people had remarked that she bore a slight resemblance to me. Yes, it was Larry who had first mentioned it. After pulling me away that day, he had glanced back and commented, "That girl looks kind of like you, but she's not as pretty." Later, at the recruitment event, my roommate and best friend also noticed the similarity. "That short-haired girl's eyes look a bit like yours," she said, "and she has a tear mole at the corner of her right eye." She sighed and added that girls with tear moles often had turbulent love lives, though she wasn't sure if it was true. Then, looking at me, she seemed to contradict herself, saying that my happy relationship proved it wasn't. In the second semester of our junior year, Larry insisted on throwing a birthday party for me. I had been deeply immersed in preparing for my graduate school exams and rarely attended social events. Larry specifically invited old classmates from our hometown, hoping it would help me relax. But on the day of the party, Larry arrived with someone I immediately recognized, as did my best friend. It was the girl people had said had eyes like mine. Larry introduced her as Helen, a junior he had met during a hiking event. Larry was passionate about outdoor activities, a passion Helen shared. They had gotten acquainted through occasional encounters. My best friend raised an eyebrow, a clear sign of her displeasure. "What a nice name," she said, her tone suggesting otherwise. Helen's face tightened and she remained silent. Larry's expression shifted instantly. He had never been fond of my best friend, considering her tactless. The dinner was far from cheerful. I remained mostly quiet while Larry kept piling food onto my plate, even adding the ginger that he knew I disliked. He used to be thoughtful and pick it out, but that evening his distraction was evident. On our way back to the dorm, Larry asked if I was unhappy. I nodded directly, telling him that he shouldn't have been rude to my best friend, pointing out that she wasn't the tactless one. Larry took my hand and explained that he hadn't actually invited Helen. She had found out about the party from his call and had brought him a gift. He hadn't known how to refuse, so out of politeness, he had brought her along. I looked at Larry blankly. Did he truly believe such a flimsy excuse? Larry then showed me a heart-shaped keychain, claiming it was Helen's gift and that she wished for our eternal happiness. He said he initially hadn't wanted to accept it, but did so as a blessing for us. Larry's sincere gaze and his promise to apologize to my best friend, contingent on my not being upset, made me relent. I didn't ask for much. I simply wanted him to establish clear boundaries with Helen and maintain a sense of propriety. Despite this, rumors began to circulate. First, a post appeared on the school forum accusing Helen of being a homewrecker, interfering in my relationship with Larry. Since Larry and I were a well-known couple on campus, this caused a significant uproar. Then, someone discovered that they had matching items. Larry's keychain and Helen's phone charm were identical. Everyone was aware of our long-standing relationship, so public opinion immediately turned against Helen. I glanced at the comments. They were overwhelmingly negative. My best friend looked at me seriously, warning me not to take the situation lightly and urging me to deal with Helen decisively. I was speechless. It wasn't about that. It depended on Larry's actions. From the beginning, I remained silent, focusing on my graduate school exams. Love and men might be plentiful, but youth was fleeting, and I knew what my priorities were. Eventually, it was Helen who approached me first. She was tearful, her eyes red and swollen, saying that her life and studies were being affected. She begged me to clear things up, swearing she had done nothing wrong. Frustrated, I rubbed my temples and told her I didn't have time for this. As I walked away, I called a close friend of mine, a computer science major, and asked for a favor. He worked quickly and found the IP address of the anonymous post that very night. I confronted Larry and told him that Helen had orchestrated everything herself. But Larry looked at me conflicted. "Irene, you investigated her?" "Shouldn't I?" I replied. "So, what are you going to do? Report her?" "Helen just likes me and got a bit carried away. She didn't think it through." I was stunned, seeing a side of Larry I hadn't understood before. "Irene," he continued, "this doesn't really affect you. It's Helen who's getting hurt here. Let's just drop it, okay?" I stared at Larry for a long moment, then offered a faint smile. "All right, if you think it can be over, then fine." Larry seemed relieved and moved to hug me, but I stepped back. "Larry, just because someone's vulnerable doesn't make them right. This is about principles and character. You may be able to let it go, but I can't." Larry became frustrated. "Then what do you want to do?" I frowned. "Handle it yourself. If you can't manage this, then let's break up." We existed in a state of Cold War for an entire semester. I heard that Larry had indeed severed ties with Helen, and she had rented a place off campus, rarely appearing when there were no classes. Although this matter faded with time, something seemed to be slowly changing between Larry and me. When I received my acceptance into graduate school, my mother called me home. I went downstairs to find Larry waiting for me. On the drive home, I remained silent while Larry occasionally glanced at me as he drove. At home, our parents announced their plans for our engagement. Larry had also taken the graduate school exams, but hadn't passed that year, even though he had always outperformed me academically. Something must have affected him. My parents comforted him, saying he could try again next year. Meanwhile, Larry's parents kept suggesting to me that graduate school could wait, but marriage couldn't. After dinner, I found myself alone in the yard, lost in thought. Larry draped a coat over my shoulders, saying it was getting cold. I turned to him. "Do you really want to get engaged?" "Of course," he replied. "Larry, we're not kids anymore. We have to consider the consequences and take responsibility." "Irene," he said, "I've never thought of marrying anyone else. You're the only one for me." His words sounded comforting, but the underlying issues remained unresolved. On the day of our engagement, Larry received a phone call. He said it was about Helen. She had slit her wrists and was in the hospital. I stopped him. "Helen has doctors," I said, "but I need you at our engagement." After a stunned silence, he told me to be good, that he would just check on her and come right back if everything was fine. And just like that, Larry left me and all our guests behind. It felt like a scene from my favorite television show. I remembered once snuggling with Larry, playfully mocking a bride in a show. saying that the unchosen one was the real third wheel. Larry would kiss my eyes then, whispering huskily for me to marry him soon. But now I realized I wasn't the main character in this unfolding drama. It took me nearly an hour to regain my composure. Though my heart ached, I still politely bid our guests farewell, explaining that Larry had an important lab project that could significantly impact his future if missed. I didn't know if anyone believed me, and I certainly didn't believe it myself. In the end, my best friend helped escort our parents home while I sat alone in the empty hall, finally succumbing to tears. All the anger and frustration I had been holding inside erupted. I reflected on my memories with Larry, laughing and crying simultaneously. Later, I drove alone to the hilltop where Larry and I used to watch the sunrise. I called him countless times, but each time he rejected the call. I laughed at myself. From birth until now, it had been 22 years. With each rejected call, I mentally erased 1 year of affection. When he finally answered on the 22nd call, the sun had just begun to break the horizon. "It's chaos here, Irene," he said, his voice strained. "Can't you just stay quiet and be sensible?" This was the first time Larry had ever spoken to me in such a tone. Honestly, it shocked and confused me. But I composed myself and said, "Larry, let's break up." I had mentioned breaking up twice before. The first time was a warning. This time, it was final. I hung up before he could respond, went home, and started packing to begin a new life. I had always been quite independent, hardly relying on Larry for anything. So even though it hurt deeply, I managed without him. I continued to wake up early for breakfast as usual and had lunch and dinner with my best friend. I threw myself into my studies, quickly rising to the top of my class. My academic advisor couldn't stop praising my dedication, but my best friend would often look at me mournfully and rub my face. "How did your round face turn into a sharp one in just a month?" she would ask. Even though I pretended to be fine during the day, the nights were difficult. I often cried myself to sleep under the covers. Larry tried to see me a few times, but I refused to meet him. He texted me daily, but I didn't reply. I considered blocking his number, but my fingers hesitated over the screen. Eventually, he cornered me in the cafeteria, saying that he had told Helen, upon her release from the hospital, that he loved only me and that I would be his wife. I looked at Larry and asked, "What if Helen threatens to kill herself again?" Larry had no answer. I told him that what I had always wanted was never just a promise or a guarantee. It was the unwavering certainty that, when faced with a choice between me and another girl, he would choose me without hesitation. Larry moved his lips as if to speak, then said in a low voice, "She wants to die. I can't just ignore her." I laughed coldly. "What if we were both going to die? Who would you save?" "Of course you," he replied. To be honest, Larry's response was firm, and I believed that if I were in the hospital, he would definitely choose me. But sadly, the circumstances were different. I stood up and said, "Larry, my love and my husband shouldn't be chosen because of a life threat." Larry probably didn't realize that on our engagement day when he chose to leave, I had already fallen from the scale, completely bruised. After that day, I ended my relationship with Larry completely. He knew my temperament and didn't pester me further, instead focusing on studying even harder for his second graduate school exam, while I buried myself in my own studies. I didn't block his number, not because I couldn't let go, but because I had already let go and didn't see a need for it. It was late autumn, and the path lined with maple trees on both sides of our school was ablaze with color. Every year when this season arrived, Larry would take my hand and we would walk down the path slowly. He had said that even after we got married, we would return every year, and later we would bring our children, and when we were old, we would support each other and come here together. But we never reached that point. I sat alone under a maple tree, the late autumn season always amplifying my sadness. In the evening, my best friend found me and reminded me that it was her birthday, asking me to have dinner with her. Damn it, I had actually forgotten. We had known each other since childhood and were neighbors through my uncle. When I was in elementary school, my parents were often away, so they would send me to my uncle's house, where several kids would play together. My best friend had an older brother the same age as my cousin, and detective dramas were popular then. We often watched them together, and every time a case was solved, we would excitedly vow to study law diligently in the future. Later, On freshman registration day, I reunited with my best friend in the dormitory. It was then that I discovered my cousin was a top law student, as was her brother. Reflecting on my childhood, I suddenly realized that my life wasn't solely defined by Larry. I had friends and family, childhood dreams, and goals. Unconsciously, I had been led to a restaurant by my best friend. I had thought it would just be the two of us that evening, but as soon as we walked in, we were drawn by the noise emanating from a private room. Instinctively, I turned my head, and my mind buzzed with disbelief. The private room door was slightly ajar, and what I saw was Larry and Helen kissing. Have they no shame? My best friend exclaimed, livid with anger. She grabbed a bottle of wine from a nearby table and started to charge towards them. I quickly pulled her back. Jessica, don't act impulsively. It wasn't just about being kind-hearted. We were law students, and getting a criminal record for fighting could jeopardize our future careers. But Jessica, naturally straightforward, couldn't bear to see me wronged. Our commotion drew the attention of the people inside the private room. Larry, seeing me, panicked and pushed Helen away. Irene, he called out, running towards me. I feared Jessica might actually hit him with the bottle, so I shouted, "Stay away from us." But Jessica was furious. She raised the bottle towards Larry. You scumbag! If I have to get detained today, I'll do it. Jessica, it's over, I said. He's not worth it. What do you mean, not worth it? She retorted. As soon as I finished speaking, Helen also walked out of the room. Her lips were swollen and red, and she looked at me mockingly. Senior, aren't you being too harsh? Larry and I are legitimately dating. Jessica yelled, Legitimate? You homewrecker! You know damn well what underhanded tricks you pulled. Helen's face flickered with anger, but quickly transformed into a smile directed at my best friend. Senior, you've never liked me. What now, you want to hit me? Aren't you studying law? Aren't you afraid I'll sue you if you hit me? Shut up! I screamed, then looked at Larry. Aren't you going to pull her away? Realizing the escalating tension, Larry grabbed Helen's arm. But Helen seemed determined to provoke my best friend. She shrugged off Larry's hand and pointed her head towards Jessica. Come on, go ahead, hit me. Don't hold back. You know, senior, it's pathetic. I heard you chased after a senior for years and still got rejected. Isn't that pathetic and cheap? Initially, I had wanted to defuse the situation, but seeing my best friend being targeted, I couldn't hold back. You're full of crap, I snapped, grabbing the bottle from Jessica and throwing it at Helen. With a thud, Larry stepped in front of Helen and the bottle struck his shoulder. It felt as if it had struck my own heart. In that moment, I truly understood the meaning of heart-wrenching pain. Finally, between us, he had chosen Helen. Helen was momentarily stunned, then hurriedly called her friends in the room to call the police. Larry pushed her away and yelled, I dare anyone to call the police. Turning to me, he said, Irene, don't be afraid. I won't let them call the police. He tried to take my hand, but I stepped back. I pointed the bottle at Helen. Bitch, I'm not afraid of you calling the police, but if you insult Jessica one more time, I swear I'll ruin you. Helen was genuinely frightened. She hadn't expected me to actually retaliate. Jessica was also shocked, holding my hand and trying to calm me down. But I wasn't calm. I didn't care if I never became a lawyer. I could fend for myself, unlike some who only got by seducing men. Jessica hugged me, moved by my outburst, saying she would support me for life. After this incident, we decided to leave the restaurant. As we were exiting, Larry, seemingly oblivious to Helen's sobs, clung to my wrist, begging me to listen to his explanation. In the middle of this tense standoff, a large, familiar hand grasped Larry's arm. Bro, you need to let go, a voice said. I froze, looked up at the person, and heard my best friend exclaim, Bro, in my ear. It was my best friend's older brother, Jack, the golden child of everyone's stories. He was intelligent, handsome, had a wonderful personality, and came from a good family. I hadn't seen him in years. He had transformed from the cheerful boy I remembered into a mature man. He gently pried Larry's hand off my wrist and smiled at me. Irene, long time no see. I was stunned for a moment, but managed to respond, Jack, long time no see. These were the names we used when we played house as children. I was the lawyer, and he was the client seeking help. He was 5 years older than me. I remembered how he and my cousin often made us cry only to then sit nearby and watch our favorite shows with us. For some reason, as childish as it was, they seemed to enjoy it. Memories flooded back like a tidal wave. Seeing him again after all these years, he remained as impressive as I remembered, while my own life felt like a mess. Irene, who is he? Larry asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Just like before, he was always wary of any men around me. What does it have to do with you? I retorted. Irene, Let's go. I didn't give Larry a chance to say anything more. I grabbed my best friend and Jack and we left. I had thought my birthday celebration was ruined, but we ended up in Jack's car. We drove to a different restaurant, and after a few tense exchanges, my cousin Alex lost his temper, ready to confront Larry. I held him back and looked at Jack. Say something. What if he really goes and hits him? Jack calmly took a sip of water. Let him go. I'll defend him in court. Eventually, I managed to restrain Alex, but he continued to rant at me. He had always believed Larry was bad news and couldn't understand why I had chosen him when there were so many other good men around. As he was talking, Alex suddenly looked at Jack, then back at me. I had no idea what he was thinking. His gaze gave me chills. Bro, Alex said to Jack, if you have something to say, just say it, all right? Irene, if your eyesight isn't messed up, why can't you see such an excellent guy? He pointed at Jack. You're heartbroken. He's single. Why don't you two get together? I choked on my soup while Jack and my best friend patted me on the back. Jack glared at Alex. Can you be serious for once? Serious? I'm doing this for you, Alex exclaimed. You're almost 30, hanging out with me all the time. What are you thinking? I bet if you don't find a girlfriend soon, your mom will make me her daughter-in-law. I coughed even harder. Just then, my best friend's phone rang. She showed the screen to Jack. I assumed it was a warm birthday call from her mother, but I was wrong. Within 5 sentences, the conversation shifted to Jack. The phone was on speaker, and I could hear her mom complaining, mentioning that the neighbor's granddaughter was already 2 and adorable, but her son only cared about work, and she didn't know when she would have a grandchild. Jack showed no emotion, calmly continuing to eat, until his mom asked in a low voice, Jessica, your brother doesn't like Alex, does he? Afterwards, none of us mentioned Larry again. We reminisced about childhood memories, and the atmosphere was surprisingly pleasant. Even though I still felt pangs of sadness, having my family and friends around made me happier overall. After the meal, we were reluctant to part ways. Jack and Alex drove us back to school. On the way, they encouraged us to study hard, promising to hire us at their law firm after graduation. My best friend pointed out that she wasn't as academically gifted as me, but noted that we had both trained under Jack's mentor. I remembered that Alex and Jack had been top students of my professor, who still spoke of them often. They were indeed impressive, having become well known in their field shortly after graduating. Recently, they had both become senior partners at their firm, rising stars in the legal industry. Back in the dorm, after getting ready for bed, I received a message. Don't overthink. Get some rest. See you tomorrow. I was surprised. It was from Jack's Instagram account, but I hadn't added him as a friend. I looked at my best friend coming out of the bathroom and remembered leaving my phone on the table during dinner. I quickly realized what had happened. My best friend, sensing my gaze, awkwardly looked out the window. Wow, it's really dark outside. Jessica, I exclaimed, jumping out of bed to grab her. She apologized. Irene, I was worried about my brother. You heard my mom. She's after both of us now. Please, just help me out. Seeing my continued stare, she smiled warmly. Irene, I think Alex is right. Don't you think you and my brother are a great match? She sat next to me, listing our compatibilities. She noted how we both looked good, had the same major, and had grown up together. Suddenly, her expression turned sad. I asked what was wrong. She admitted to seeing Larry with Helen several times, but hadn't told me to spare my feelings. She felt guilty, thinking she should have told me earlier or avoid the restaurant that night. Crying, she hugged me, saying I deserved better, and that Larry and Helen had no right to treat me the way they did. We hugged, and for the first time, I cried out loud. Yes, I sobbed. How could they? The next day, when I went to see my academic advisor, my eyes were as puffy as a goldfish's. I had assumed no one else would be around, so I hadn't paid much attention to my appearance. But the moment I pushed open the office door, I wanted to disappear. Because not only was my advisor there, but Jack was there too. And then it clicked. I remembered he had said, "See you tomorrow," yesterday. But I had been too busy chatting with my best friend and had completely forgotten about it. God, could this get any more awkward? Perfect timing. Irene's here, my advisor said. Jack, didn't you say you were shorthanded? Let Irene be your assistant. I was stunned. Before my brain could fully process the situation, Jack smiled and nodded. I couldn't ask for more, but I'm not sure if the great lawyer Irene would grace us with her presence. Apparently, the law firm had been overwhelmed with cases recently, some of them quite complex. Jack had come to see my advisor to inquire if there were any suitable junior students they could recruit. Naturally, as the advisor's star pupil, I was the obvious choice. Jack moved quickly. By the afternoon, he had delivered a huge stack of documents for me. Since I needed to go through some paperwork with the school to officially join the firm, Jack allowed me to familiarize myself with the material first. It seemed he had come directly from the firm, still dressed in work attire. A navy blue shirt, black dress pants, and gold-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. This was different from his casual look at dinner the day before, or even his business casual attire that morning. I don't know why, but looking at this version of Jack, the words "cultured rogue" inexplicably popped into my head. My heart skipped a beat. How could this man transition between styles so effortlessly? I stood nearby, watching him politely decline two female classmates who were asking for his contact information. His tone was gentle but distant. He simply stated that he already had a girlfriend and was about to get married. I thought to myself, see, if you truly want to refuse someone, you don't give them a chance to get close. Once the other students had left, I finally smiled and walked over. Jack, you're as charming as ever, I said. He gently tapped my forehead and handed me the materials. There's quite a bit. Go through it and ask me if you have any questions. He seemed busy and left in a hurry after delivering the documents. Just as he was about to walk away, he turned back. Available 24/7, he said. I laughed. You better be prepared. I might call you at midnight. Looking forward to it, he replied, using the same phrase again. I watched him walk away until he was out of sight, then turned around to see Larry standing there with a dark look on his face. My smile instantly faded. Without a word, I walked past him, clutching my pile of books. Irene, can we talk? Larry asked. I've said everything there is to say, I replied, not stopping. There's nothing left to discuss. I didn't even look at him. That's Jack, Larry said, his voice laced with a hint of warning. The famous campus heartthrob for years running. Even after graduation, he's still a big deal here. I felt a flash of caution. What are you planning to do, Larry? I asked, finally turning to face him. I was the one who hit you yesterday. If you're mad, go to the police, but don't trouble my friend. You're protecting him? Larry scoffed. Irene, we're the ones meant to be together. We're not, I said firmly. Larry froze, staring at me in disbelief. I offered a faint smile and continued walking. Irene, I never agreed to break up with you, he shouted after me. I kept walking, but called back over my shoulder. He's my senior. It might have seemed like a random comment, but Larry should understand its implications within our university hierarchy and social dynamics. When he had made me feel uneasy by spending time with that freshman girl, we hadn't officially ended our relationship yet. Back at the dorm, my best friend was standing by the window. When she saw me, she said, Larry hasn't left. He looks kind of pathetic. She asked what I had said to him to make him look so heartbroken. I glanced out the window and made eye contact with Larry. I shook my head. He's rattled by your brother. My brother? She questioned. Larry is a jealous type. Seeing Jack only adds to his frustration. Jack was the campus heartthrob, undeniably handsome, and he excelled academically and in sports. For someone as exceptional as Jack, looks were the least impressive thing about him. But Larry was different. He started off well but began to falter when Helen entered the picture. Yesterday, you mentioned a new freshman had taken over his title as campus heartthrob. Now he's failing exams, losing his girlfriend, and even his former admirers are moving on. My best friend clicked her tongue. Sounds like Helen brings bad luck, but who's to blame? I sat in a daze when my friend suddenly shrieked. What's wrong? I asked, startled. She showed me her phone. Is that Helen? The photo was blurry, but I could tell it was her. But my focus was drawn to the man in the picture with Helen. Was that Jack? My friend launched into a rant about Jack, Larry, and Helen. Finally, exhausted, she ended the call. I handed her a glass of water, knowing she must be thirsty. Before I could speak, she got up, pulling me to my feet. It's almost dark. Where are we going? To find my brother. Are you crazy? He's working overtime. He's busy. My friend finally calmed down. I sighed and gently pulled her back to sit down. I explained that Jack wasn't like Larry. He wouldn't do anything inappropriate. Jack had already clarified that Helen was a client of another lawyer at the firm. She had greeted him at the entrance, and that was the extent of their interaction. My friend stopped worrying about Jack. But around 1:30 a.m., I received a message from Jack asking if I was awake. I've always been a night owl, so I quickly replied. The next second, my phone rang. I was whispering under the covers, and surprisingly, Jack started whispering too. I couldn't help but laugh and told him he could speak normally. Jack chuckled quietly and then explained about his brief encounter with Helen earlier that day. He said he genuinely didn't know Helen well. He had just instinctively stopped to say hello at the door. He hadn't anticipated that someone would capture that fleeting moment in a photograph. I felt conflicted and touched by his consideration. In similar situations, Larry used to dismiss my concerns, telling me I was overthinking things. I wanted to tell Jack that he didn't need to explain this to me because I had no reason to be upset. Eventually, Jack broke the awkward silence. Oh, by the way, I need to drop by school tomorrow morning. What do you want for breakfast? Though the change of topic felt sudden, I was moved by how he seemed to sense my discomfort. Unlike Larry, Jack appeared to genuinely care about my feelings. Larry never seemed to, often thinking I was always so strong and independent. But that wasn't an excuse for his lack of consideration. I thought that was the end of our conversation, but for some reason, Jack started showing up frequently at my dorm from that day forward. Once or twice could be a coincidence, but every couple of days felt significant. He always had a reason, dropping something off for his sister. Then that became an excuse to eat together, and soon I noticed my best friend making all sorts of excuses to leave us alone. I could sense it. Jack liked me. I had witnessed him politely decline other girls, even firmly rebuffing Helen when she tried to strike up a conversation, so I knew this was different. One time when Jack was dropping me off at school, Helen saw us from afar. Jack, fancy running into you again, she called out. One moment he was smiling at me, the next his expression turned cold. Do we know each other well enough for you to call me that? He asked, his tone sharp. Helen froze for a moment, then turned pale. She attempted to explain with a forced smile, but Jack cut her off. At the law firm, you can address me as lawyer. Outside of work, we are not that familiar. There's no need to say hello on purpose. With that, Jack took my wrist and walked away. Neither of us spoke on the way. His hand held my wrist warmly and firmly. I recalled his words to Helen and couldn't help but burst out laughing. Jack truly is amazing. If Larry hadn't occupied so many years of my life, I would have fallen for him instantly. Even now, haven't I already begun to? But my wounds haven't fully healed yet, and I'm not quite ready for a new relationship. Perhaps sensing my hesitation, Jack never explicitly confessed his feelings, sparing me any potential discomfort. He simply remained quietly by my side. My best friend once remarked that Jack and I had so much in common, never running out of things to talk about. Even someone as self-reliant as me unconsciously started to depend on him. A month later, the law firm took on a significant case. Jack and Alex began working incredibly long hours. I was supposed to be Jack's assistant, but due to confidentiality protocols and my unofficial staff status, I wasn't involved in this particular case. Consequently, we barely saw each other during that period. However, no matter how busy he always found a moment to send me a message. The messages were brief but thoughtful. Not only him, but my best friend would also update me on his schedule daily, even providing his locations. Is this what it feels like to be truly liked and cared for? Even when he barely had time to eat, he would remind me to eat on time, never neglecting me because of work, nor would he seek comfort from someone else when he was busy. Finally, the case made significant progress, and Jack and Alex were able to relax a little. That weekend, a movie I had been looking forward to was released. I bought 4 tickets, but Jack and Alex had to leave on a last-minute business trip that morning. I felt a pang of disappointment. On the way to the airport, Alex was driving, Jessica was in the front seat, and Jack and I were in the back. He had closed his eyes, resting. I didn't want to disturb him. Suddenly, I felt a warmth on my hand. Jack was holding it. I opened my eyes to look at him. He kept his eyes closed but held my hand tighter. We didn't speak until we reached the airport, where he pulled me close amidst the crowd. "Irene," he said, his gaze intense, "I have something to tell you when I get back." His stare made my heart race. I could only nod, my cheeks flushing. You come back soon," I managed to say. That night, Jessica and I went to see the movie, but neither of us was truly engaged in the story. As we were leaving, Jessica excitedly showed me Jack's tweet. He had posted a picture of the movie ticket with the caption, "Watching with Alex remotely." Alex had commented, "You were with me, but your mind was on my sister." I laughed, realizing the depth of Jack's feelings for someone. You can clearly see the effort someone makes, and the lack of effort is equally noticeable. Like Larry, who had ample time for me but still divided his attention with others. Jack, despite being incredibly busy, did everything he could to make me happy. Our relationship naturally grew closer, little by little. A good relationship truly nurtures a person. Reflecting on the days after my breakup with Larry compared to now, the difference is stark. Today, what made me happiest was Jack saying their trip would end soon, probably just 3 to 5 more days before he could return, just in time for my birthday. On my way back to the dorm, I was on the phone with Jack when I saw Larry standing outside. My smile froze instantly. "Irene, can we talk?" he asked. I ignored him and tried to walk past, but Larry grabbed my arm. "There's really nothing between Helen and me. That day was just me being drunk. Her eyes remind me of you, and with the alcohol." "Larry," I interrupted, "stop saying she looks like me. It disgusts me." "Irene, don't be like this. I know I was wrong. Please give me a chance. Let's start over." I agreed firmly, I said. Larry's face lit up with joy for a fleeting moment. He stepped forward to hug me, but I dodged him. "Larry, if you could turn back time, if you could make everything go back to before it happened, I'll forgive you." Perhaps my expression was too cold because Larry looked genuinely heartbroken. "Irene, have you fallen for Jack?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Lately, there had been numerous rumors circulating at school about Jack and me. Everyone seemed to believe we were together. Because Larry had betrayed me before, people felt I had finally found happiness and offered their unspoken blessings. I hadn't bothered to clarify the nature of my relationship with Jack. Larry grew visibly angry at my silence. He gripped my wrist tightly, shouting, "What does Jack have that I don't?" I stared at him for a long moment. "In every way," I said, my voice steady. "He's better than you." Larry was stunned. It seemed he hadn't expected such a direct and cutting response. "Irene, that's so heartless," he said, his voice laced with pain. "Really? Is it more heartless than what you did? Compared to you being ambiguous with another girl while still with me, leaving me alone at our engagement party, kissing someone else passionately but claiming I was still the one in your heart, I think you take the prize." I mentioned the engagement party, causing Larry to close his eyes as if physically struck. It was perhaps the memory he least wanted to confront. I recalled several instances during that tumultuous period when he had tried to explain his actions, saying that Helen was too dependent on him, while I was too independent. He found a sense of being admired and needed in Helen, whereas I didn't seem to need him and was even stronger than him in many aspects of our lives. I found his reasoning incredibly absurd. My own drive and efforts were his justifications for his infidelity. I no longer wanted to engage in this futile cycle of justification and blame, so I turned to go upstairs. Larry pulled me back. Irene, is Jack that great? Better than our 20-plus years of feelings? I didn't turn back, but replied loudly, my voice echoing in the quiet evening air. Larry, Jack is that great. Did you ever consider that perhaps you aren't admired and needed because you're too weak? Why doesn't Jack feel that way? Because he's confident, strong, and worthy. After delivering those words, I walked into the dorm building. But when I picked up my phone, I realized the person on the other end hadn't hung up. I tentatively put the phone to my ear. You, Irene, Jack's voice said softly. I've booked an early flight for tomorrow. I want to see you right away. Early the next morning, my roommate was still asleep when I quietly got out of bed. Judging by the time, Jack should be arriving soon. I took a few deep breaths, my hand holding the makeup brush trembling slightly. It was strange. This wasn't our first meeting, so why was I feeling so nervous? A message popped up on Instagram. I'll be at the school in 30 minutes. I was stunned. How could he be so fast? There was no time for makeup. I quickly tidied myself up and went downstairs, only to find Helen waiting. I felt a surge of annoyance and tried to avoid her, but Helen called out to me. Irene, are you satisfied now? My life is a mess because of you. Larry doesn't want me anymore. Even when I tried to be like you, even drunk, he recognized I wasn't you and told me to leave, saying he'd be upset if you saw. Irene, you don't want him anymore, but he's still thinking of you. He's pushing me away to win your forgiveness. So now you have true love, but what about me? This is between you two, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It has nothing to do with me. Helen spat on the ground and looked at me sarcastically. Irene, don't act like you're so high and mighty. You're relying on a man for validation too. Otherwise, why are you clinging to Jack? You're just like me. Helen's eyes were red and agitated. I recalled Jack mentioning before that Helen had consulted a law firm about property issues related to affairs. If his assessment was correct, Helen had likely been deceived by a married man. She had gone from being in a relationship to being a mistress and then being exposed by the wife, suffering injustice in the process. Perhaps that was how the initial rumors had started. Even though she might have been conflicted in that relationship and eventually made compromises, she was still partly a victim, garnering some initial sympathy. But later, she had deliberately tried to sabotage my relationship with Larry, knowingly becoming a homewrecker, which had led to her infamy at school. She seemed to believe her current predicament was entirely my fault, deepening her animosity towards me. I considered her someone with a fundamentally distorted perspective. It was best to maintain distance from someone with such a twisted mindset, just in case something unpredictable happened. I checked the time. Jack should be arriving soon. I started walking in the opposite direction from Helen, but I suddenly heard her hurried footsteps behind me. Instinctively, I turned around just in time to see a shadow rush forward, and then Helen's voice exploded in my ears. You slut! If you die, Larry won't leave me. He's all I have, so you should go to hell. Irene! In that split second, I was pulled into a tight embrace. A clattering sound followed as a fruit knife fell to the ground, the blade stained with blood. My heart skipped a terrifying beat. I quickly pushed Jack away. Where are you hurt? I cried, my voice trembling. I saw a long, horrifyingly deep gash on his arm. Tears welled up uncontrollably, but he held me tightly, enduring the pain to comfort me. As long as you're okay, he murmured. When the police arrived to take Helen away, she gazed at me with crazed eyes. Why? Why do you have everything? Why does everyone protect you? Why? My gaze turned cold. Because I respect myself, I stated firmly. Helen was taken aback, then let out a chilling laugh. Even as they pushed her into the police car, she continued to stare at me with a venomous look. Attempted murder with a knife, while perhaps not resulting in extensive jail time, would certainly lead to a criminal record, effectively destroying her future as a college student. I couldn't comprehend why she would throw away such a bright future. Jack had been injured protecting me, so I took care of him during his medical leave. We still hadn't openly discussed our feelings, but there was an undeniable understanding between us. On my birthday, we decided to have a small gathering at his place with my cousin and best friend. I couldn't explain it, but I had always sensed a subtle tension between my cousin and my best friend. My best friend had harbored a crush on my cousin for a long time. Back then, Helen had cruelly mocked her for pursuing our upperclassman for years without success, and that upperclassman was indeed my cousin. I had asked my cousin about it a few times, but he always maintained he wasn't interested, emphasizing that feelings needed to be mutual. My best friend had eventually seemed to move on, but recently, for reasons I couldn't quite grasp, it felt like my cousin was becoming increasingly attentive towards her. Take today, for instance. I had seen him hugging her on the balcony. She had initially pushed him away, but he hadn't seemed upset. In the end, she had relented and allowed him to hold her close. When it comes to feelings, Jessica is braver than you. Jack's voice came from behind me, startling me slightly. He stood there, gently wrapping his arms around me. He leaned down, his chin resting on my neck, his breath tickling my ear. Irene still not willing to be my girlfriend? It's not that I don't want to, I began, wanting to explain. It was just that he had been hurt right after his return, and we hadn't had a proper chance to talk about everything. But he continued, his arms tightening around me. But it's fine. We can start dating after marriage. Let's just get married first. I don't want to wait anymore. Love after marriage works too, right? Irene, if we wait any longer, I'm afraid you'll run away. I laughed softly at his earnest words and leaned back lightly against him. Well, it's not impossible. Hearing my response, Jack's lips brushed against my neck. He placed gentle pecks along my skin, his voice becoming hoarse and low. Then let me properly introduce myself. I'm Jack, 28 years old, clean background, no bad habits, never had a girlfriend, just someone I've cherished in my heart for many years. My heart skipped a frantic beat and tears welled up in my eyes. I turned in his embrace, looking up at him. I'm Irene, 23 years old, had one boyfriend, but I'm pure in body and mind. I want to marry the man behind me and spend the rest of my life with him for many, many years.